Have you ever heard a cry so faint, yet so powerful, that it changed your life forever? On a chilly autumn morning in Portland, Oregon, Sarah Mitchell was about to discover how a tiny sound would lead to one of the most extraordinary discoveries she'd ever make. The universe has a way of placing us exactly where we need to be, even when we least expect it. And on that fateful September morning, Sarah had no idea that her routine walk to work would become anything but ordinary. Walking through the industrial district of Portland, Sarah clutched her coffee cup tightly as the crisp morning air nipped at her fingers. The streetlights were just beginning to fade as dawn crept over the city skyline, casting long shadows between the abandoned warehouses that lined the street. Her footsteps echoed against the concrete, creating a rhythm that had become familiar over her 3 years working at the local animal shelter. But today, something would break that rhythm in the most unexpected way. The wind carried an unusual sound, so faint that at first, Sarah thought she might have imagined it. She stopped, holding her breath, straining to hear through the ambient noise of the awakening city. There it was again, a sound that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was different from the usual urban wildlife she encountered. Not a bird, not a stray cat's regular meow. This sound carried something else in its tone: desperation. Sarah approached the entrance of a long-abandoned warehouse, its windows boarded up and its walls covered in graffiti. The sound grew slightly clearer, a high-pitched, rhythmic crying that pulled at her heartstrings. But there was something odd about it, something that didn't quite fit with what she'd expect from a cat in distress. Her years of experience working with animals told her this wasn't a typical situation, and her instincts were rarely wrong. The morning sun had barely begun to illuminate the building's facade, casting strange shadows through the gaps in the boards. Sarah pulled out her phone's flashlight, her hand trembling slightly as she approached the source of the sound. The crying seemed to be coming from inside the wall itself, which made no sense at all. How could anything be trapped inside a solid brick wall? But as she moved closer, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. A small gap between the bricks, barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look. Working at the Portland Animal Shelter had exposed Sarah to all sorts of rescue situations, but nothing quite like this. Her colleagues often joked that she had a sixth sense when it came to animals in distress, a gift that had helped her save countless lives over the years. Today, that gift was telling her that whatever waited behind that wall needed her help desperately. But she couldn't have possibly prepared herself for what she was about to discover. The gray morning light was steadily growing stronger, revealing more details of the decrepit building. Sarah noticed that some of the bricks near the ground appeared newer than the others, as if they'd been recently disturbed and hastily replaced. The crying continued, but now she could hear something else, a sound that made her question everything she thought she knew about this situation. It wasn't just one voice she was hearing, there was something else, something that made her heart race with both fear and anticipation. Time seemed to stand still as Sarah debated what to do next. Her phone showed 7:15 a.m. She was already late for her shift at the shelter, but this couldn't wait. Whatever was behind that wall needed help now. She could feel it in her bones, the same way she'd felt it countless times before when an animal's life hung in the balance. This time, though, something told her she was about to uncover something far more significant than a typical rescue. The neighborhood around her was beginning to wake up. A few early morning workers hurried past, their footsteps quick and purposeful, none of them aware of the drama unfolding just feet away. Sarah had learned long ago that sometimes the most important moments in life happened in plain sight, while the world continued its normal rhythm around them. This was one of those moments. She could feel it with every fiber of her being. As Sarah inched closer to the wall, the crying suddenly changed pitch. It was as if whatever was trapped inside knew help was near. The sound became more urgent, more desperate. Sarah's hands shook as she pulled out her phone again, this time to call for backup. She knew she couldn't handle this alone, but what she didn't know was that this rescue would soon become one of the most talked about stories in Portland's recent history. The morning traffic was picking up on the nearby street. creating a stark contrast between the mundane world of commuters and the mysterious drama unfolding at the warehouse. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities of what she might find, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality. Her years of experience told her that animals could end up in the strangest places, but this situation felt different. There was an intentionality about it that made her skin crawl. The gap in the wall was barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look, and Sarah wondered how many people had walked past it, completely unaware of the life-or-death situation playing out behind those bricks. The crying had become more distinct now, and with each passing moment, Sarah became more certain that this wasn't going to be a typical rescue. Her instincts were screaming that there was more to this story, much more. Portland's infamous morning mist was beginning to lift, revealing more details of the building's facade. Sarah noticed something else now: tiny scratch marks around the gap in the wall. Whatever was trapped inside had been fighting to get out, and by the looks of it, for quite some time. The thought made her heart ache, but it also strengthened her resolve to solve this mystery. Something about the whole situation felt orchestrated, planned even. The new bricks, the hidden gap, the location. It was as if someone had deliberately created this prison. But who would do such a thing, and more importantly, why? These questions raced through Sarah's mind as she waited for help to arrive. Little did she know, the answers would be more shocking than anything she could have imagined. Sarah's phone buzzed. Her colleague Mark was on his way with rescue equipment. As she waited, she continued to study the wall, looking for any additional clues. The crying had become more persistent now, as if sensing that salvation was near. But there was something else in that sound, something that Sarah's trained ear was just beginning to pick up on. It was a detail that would prove crucial in understanding the full scope of what they were about to uncover. The first rays of direct sunlight finally reached the warehouse wall, illuminating the scene in a new way. Sarah gasped as she noticed something glinting near the gap, something metallic that definitely shouldn't have been there. Her mind began connecting dots she didn't even know existed, and a terrible realization started to dawn on her. This wasn't just about saving an animal. This was about uncovering something much darker. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the morning air, and Sarah felt a mix of relief and apprehension. She knew that whatever they were about to discover would change not only her life, but the lives of everyone involved. The crying from within the wall had reached a fever pitch, as if whatever was trapped inside knew that its moment of liberation was finally at hand. Mark's van screeched to a halt nearby, and Sarah could hear him running toward her, with equipment in tow. The moment of truth was approaching, and Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. Whatever waited behind that wall, she knew this would be a rescue unlike any other in her career. But she couldn't have possibly imagined just how right she was about that. As the rest of Portland went about its morning routine, a small group of rescuers gathered around the warehouse wall, preparing to uncover its secrets. The crying continued, a soundtrack to what was about to become one of the most remarkable rescue stories in the city's history. Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself for what they might find. Sometimes the smallest sounds lead to the biggest discoveries, and this tiny cry for help was about to reveal something that would leave the entire city in shock. The tension in the air was palpable as Mark began setting up the rescue equipment. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to uncover something that went far beyond a simple animal rescue. The crying had taken on an almost ethereal quality now, echoing off the surrounding buildings in a way that made it seem as if the whole city was holding its breath, waiting to learn what secrets lay behind those carefully placed bricks. The next few moments would test everything Sarah thought she knew about animal rescue. With trembling hands, Mark began to carefully remove the first brick, revealing a small cavity within the wall. The crying grew louder, more desperate, and now they could hear a distinct scratching sound accompanying it. Sarah's flashlight beam penetrated the darkness, and what she saw made her gasp in horror. Inside the wall cavity, barely visible in the dim light, was a tiny gray kitten, its fur matted and dirty. But that wasn't what caused Sarah's sharp intake of breath. The kitten was tangled in something, something that glinted menacingly in the flashlight beam. As they removed more bricks, the full extent of the situation became horrifyingly clear. The kitten was wrapped in a complex web of thin wire, deliberately placed to keep it trapped. The discovery sent shockwaves through the small rescue team. This wasn't a case of an animal accidentally getting stuck. Someone had intentionally imprisoned this tiny creature in the wall. The wire setup was elaborate, almost professional, suggesting a level of premeditation that made Sarah's blood run cold. Who would do something so cruel, and more importantly, why go to such lengths to trap a single kitten? The kitten's cries had changed now, becoming more urgent as it sensed potential rescue. But moving too quickly could be dangerous. The wire wrapped around its small body was razor thin and already cutting into its skin. Sarah could see spots of blood in the matted gray fur, and her heart ached at the thought of how long this little one had been suffering. One wrong move could cause serious injury or worse. Mark's face had gone pale as he studied the setup. "Sarah," he whispered, "this isn't random. Look at how the wire is arranged. It's like someone was using this kitten as bait." The implication hung heavy in the air. If the kitten was bait, what, or who, was the intended target? The question sent a chill down Sarah's spine as she realized this rescue might be connected to something far more sinister. Time was now their enemy. The kitten's breathing had become labored. Whether from stress or injury, they couldn't be sure. Sarah could see its tiny chest rising and falling rapidly, too rapidly. They needed to act fast, but the wire trap made every movement dangerous. One member of the team had already called the police. This level of intentional cruelty warranted investigation. The morning sun now fully illuminated the scene, revealing more disturbing details. The wire wasn't just wrapped around the kitten. It was anchored to something deeper in the wall. As they carefully removed more bricks, they discovered a crude pulley system. Someone had spent considerable time and effort setting this up, but the purpose remained a terrifying mystery. The kitten's pitiful cries echoed off the warehouse walls, a soundtrack to their growing horror. Local news vans began arriving, drawn by police radio chatter about the unusual rescue. Sarah barely noticed them. Her entire focus on the trapped kitten. Its eyes, bright green and filled with fear, locked onto hers. In that moment, she made a silent promise to not only save this little life, but to find whoever was responsible for this cruelty. The kitten seemed to understand, letting out a soft mew that tugged at everyone's hearts. A strange detail caught Sarah's attention. Around the kitten's neck was what appeared to be a faded collar, barely visible under the wire. This wasn't a stray. Someone had owned this kitten before it ended up in this nightmare. The implications made her stomach turn. Was this a stolen pet? Part of some larger criminal operation? The questions multiplied with each new discovery, turning what seemed like a simple rescue into something far more complex. The police arrived as Mark was preparing specialized cutting tools. An officer approached, his face grim as he surveyed the scene. "We've had reports," he said quietly to Sarah, "of similar setups in other cities. Never with a live animal before, though." The information hit Sarah like a physical blow. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern that had finally escalated to involving living creatures. Sarah's years of experience told her they were running out of time. The kitten's movements were becoming weaker, its cries softer. The wire trap seemed designed to tighten with struggle, and the poor creature's attempts to free itself had only made things worse. They needed to act now, but the complexity of the trap made every option risky. One wrong cut could spell disaster. The growing crowd of onlookers added to the pressure. News cameras recorded every moment, and Sarah could hear reporters speculating about the situation. But something else caught her attention, a figure standing apart from the crowd, watching intently. When her eyes met his, he quickly turned away and disappeared around the corner. Sarah filed the observation away, focusing back on the immediate crisis at hand. More police units arrived, including a detective who specialized in animal cruelty cases. His face darkened as he examined photos of the trap setup. "This is professional work," he muttered, making notes in a small notebook. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. The words confirmed Sarah's worst fears. This wasn't a random act of cruelty. but part of something larger and more organized. The kitten had gone quiet now, its energy depleted from hours or possibly days of struggling. Only its eyes moved, following Sarah's movements as she and Mark prepared for the delicate extraction. The wire had cut deep in some places, and they could see signs of infection beginning. Every minute counted now. This wasn't just about freeing the kitten anymore, it was about saving its life. Portland Animal Control arrived with their specialized equipment, but even they seemed taken aback by the complexity of the situation. The trap was like nothing any of them had seen before. It was almost artistic in its cruelty, designed to cause maximum suffering while keeping its victim alive. The thought made Sarah sick to her stomach. What kind of person could conceive of such a thing? The detective pulled Sarah aside, showing her photos on his phone. Similar traps had been found in Seattle, Vancouver, and San Francisco, all in industrial areas, all with the same level of technical sophistication. But this was the first time they'd found one with a living victim. The kitten's discovery might finally help them crack a case that had baffled law enforcement up and down the West Coast. A vet arrived on scene, bringing critical medical supplies. The kitten would need immediate treatment once freed. Its injuries were severe, and infection was a major concern. But before they could treat it, they had to get it out. The next few moments would be crucial. One wrong move could cause the wire to tighten further, leading to catastrophic injury. Mark had finally figured out the trap's mechanism. It was designed to tighten in response to both struggle and rescue attempts. Whoever built it had anticipated someone trying to free the victim. This wasn't just cruelty. It was a calculated attempt to cause maximum harm to both the trapped animal and anyone trying to help. The discovery added a new level of urgency to their efforts. Sarah watched as the kitten's breathing became more labored. They were running out of time. The trap had done its cruel work efficiently, slowly tightening over time. But they couldn't rush. Hasty movements now could prove fatal. The entire rescue team held their breath as Mark prepared to make the first crucial cut in the wire network. Everything hinged on the next few moments. Through her headset, Sarah could hear the rescue team coordinator relaying information to a growing network of law enforcement agencies. This case was bigger than anyone had initially realized. The kitten had unknowingly exposed a criminal operation that spanned multiple states. But right now, none of that mattered to Sarah. Her entire world had narrowed to the space between heartbeats as they prepared to attempt the rescue. Mark's hands steadied as he positioned the specialized wire cutters. Years of experience had prepared him for many things, but never something like this. The kitten's life hung literally by threads, and the wrong move could spell disaster. But then Sarah noticed something, a pattern in the wire's configuration that she hadn't seen before. "Wait," she called out, her voice cutting through the tense silence. "Look at how it's looped here. There's a sequence." The detective leaned in closer, his years of investigation experience suddenly proving invaluable in an unexpected way. "She's right," he muttered, pulling out a small UV light from his kit. Under the purple glow, something became visible on the wires. Tiny markings, almost invisible to the naked eye. The trap wasn't just cruel, it was a signature. The perpetrator wanted to be recognized, wanted their work to be appreciated. This realization changed everything. Sarah's mind raced as she processed this new information. The markings weren't random. They were a code, a sequence that might tell them how to safely dismantle the trap. Her years working with complex animal rescue situations had taught her to look for patterns, and now that skill might save this kitten's life. The team huddled closer, mapping out each marking, each twist in the wire. Time was running out, but rushing could be fatal. The kitten's green eyes locked onto Sarah's once again, and in that moment, something passed between them, a connection, an understanding. The tiny creature had stopped struggling, as if it somehow knew that help was finally figuring out the puzzle. Its trust was both heartbreaking and motivating. Sarah couldn't fail now, not when they were so close to understanding the trap's deadly design. As they documented each marking, a disturbing picture emerged. The trap wasn't just designed to harm, it was designed to teach a lesson. Each wire represented a step, a choice that would either lead to freedom or disaster. The perpetrator was playing a game, testing the rescuers' intelligence and patience. It was sick, but understanding their mindset might be the key to saving the kitten. The crowd behind them had grown larger, but Sarah barely noticed. Her entire world had narrowed to the complex puzzle before her. The UV light revealed more markings, creating a map of sorts. Each section of wire had its own signature, its own role in the larger mechanism. The person who designed this wasn't just cruel. They were brilliant, and that made them all the more dangerous. Mark's voice broke through Sarah's concentration. Look at this pattern. It repeats every third loop. If we follow it... His voice trailed off as he traced the wire's path with his finger, careful not to touch it. The kitten watched his movement, unusually still now, as if it too was studying the pattern. The entire rescue team held their breath as Mark's experience with mechanical systems began to make sense of the madness. The detective was rapidly taking photos, documenting everything. "This is unprecedented," he whispered, almost to himself. The level of detail, the planning involved. But Sarah wasn't interested in the criminal aspect right now. She saw something in the pattern that others had missed, a weakness, a flaw in the design. Perhaps the perpetrator's pride, their need to show off their intelligence, had finally worked against them. Sarah's hand shook as she pointed to a specific intersection of wires. "Here," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "This is where it all connects. See how the markings converge?" The others leaned in, and slowly understanding dawned on their faces. The trap's complexity was also its weakness. Like all elaborate systems, it had a single point of failure. They just had to be brave enough to exploit it. Time seemed to slow as Mark positioned the cutters at the crucial point. The kitten's breathing had become shallow, but its eyes remained alert, fixed on the tools that might finally bring freedom. The wire's markings glowed faintly under the UV light, creating an almost beautiful pattern, beauty hiding deadly purpose. Sarah held her breath as Mark prepared to make the cut that would either save or doom the tiny creature. A sudden noise from the crowd caused everyone to jump, but Mark's hands remained steady. He had found his moment of perfect clarity, understanding exactly what needed to be done. The kitten seemed to sense it too, remaining perfectly still as the cutters aligned with the master wire. Years of experience, intuition, and now this new understanding of the trap's design all came together in this crucial moment. The sound of the wire cutters closing seemed impossibly loud in the tense silence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, beautifully, the entire web of wire began to loosen. The trap's complex design, meant to cause pain and death, was unraveling from a single, precise cut. The kitten let out a tiny mew, as if it couldn't quite believe what was happening. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for the loosening wires. The trap's release revealed more about its creator. They hadn't anticipated someone taking the time to understand their work, to find the pattern hidden within the cruelty. Their arrogance, their need to show off their intelligence, had become their undoing. The kitten was going to survive, and in doing so, might help catch a dangerous criminal. The vet moved in quickly as the last wires fell away. The kitten's injuries were severe, but no longer life-threatening. As they worked to stabilize the tiny patient, Sarah noticed something else, a tiny microchip glinting among the removed wires. It wasn't part of the trap, it had been planted there deliberately, another signature of the perpetrator. The detective's eyes widened as he realized the implications. News cameras captured the moment as the kitten was finally lifted free from its prison. But Sarah's attention was on something else. Movement in the crowd again, the same figure from before watching intently. This time, though, they didn't disappear. Their expression was one of fascination, of professional interest. Sarah caught the detective's eye and subtly nodded in their direction. The trap's creator had come to admire their work. The kitten's rescue had become more than just saving a life. It had become the key to unraveling a larger mystery. As medical teams worked to stabilize the tiny survivor, law enforcement quietly moved through the crowd. The perpetrator's need to witness their work, to see others struggle with their creation, had drawn them back to the scene. It was their first mistake, and it would be their last. Sarah cradled the kitten as it received emergency treatment. Its survival had changed everything. Previous traps had only been discovered after they were empty, their victims long gone. But this time, thanks to a tiny cry for help and the rescuers' determination to understand rather than just dismantle, they had not only saved a life, but had also caught a glimpse into the mind of a dangerous individual. The detectives' phone buzzed with messages from other jurisdictions. The pattern they'd discovered in the wires matched evidence from other scenes. The kitten's rescue hadn't just saved one life. It had provided the key to understanding a series of crimes that had puzzled law enforcement for months. Sarah looked down at the brave little survivor in her arms, amazed at how such a small creature could bring about such significant change. The morning sun now illuminated the scene fully, casting long shadows across the discarded wires and broken bricks. The trap's complexity was even more apparent in the daylight, but so was the simple solution they'd discovered. Sometimes the most elaborate problems had straightforward answers. You just had to care enough to look for them. The kitten's soft purring seemed to agree with this sentiment. As medical teams prepared to transport their tiny patient to the emergency veterinary hospital, Sarah noticed something else about the removed wires. They formed a specific shape when laid out, another signature hidden in plain sight. The trap's creator hadn't just wanted to cause pain. They had wanted to create art, twisted as it was. This insight would prove crucial in understanding and catching them. The crowd's murmurs grew as police moved into position. The figure Sarah had spotted was still there, watching with an intensity that set them apart from the other onlookers. Their expression wasn't one of horror or sympathy. It was appreciation, the look of an artist admiring their work. But their masterpiece had become their downfall, their pride, leading them right into the hands of justice. The emergency veterinary hospital buzzed with focused energy as the team worked to treat their tiny patient. Sarah watched through the observation window as they carefully cleaned and dressed each wound. The kitten, despite its ordeal, remained remarkably resilient. Every few minutes, those bright green eyes would seek out Sarah's face, as if drawing strength from their connection. The vet had said it was a miracle the kitten had survived so long in the trap. Across town, the police station was equally busy. The suspect caught at the scene had been identified as Marcus Green, a former engineering student with a history of increasingly disturbing behavior. The detective showed Sarah photos of other traps they discovered, each one more elaborate than the last. But none had been as sophisticated or as cruel as the one that had nearly claimed their little survivor's life. The kitten had unknowingly helped catch a serial animal abuser. The veterinary team discovered something else during their examination: the kitten's microchip. A quick scan revealed its name, Hope. It had been reported missing from a home in Seattle 3 weeks ago. The family had given up searching, assuming the worst. Now, thanks to Hope's incredible will to survive and her piercing cry for help, not only would she return home, but other families would get answers about their missing pets. Sarah spent every free moment at the hospital during Hope's recovery. The kitten's transformation was remarkable. As the wounds healed and the matted fur was carefully cleaned away, a beautiful gray coat emerged. But more striking was the change in Hope's eyes. The fear was gone, replaced by a spark of mischief and joy. She had not let her trauma define her, becoming instead an inspiration to everyone who heard her story. News of Hope's rescue spread quickly across social media. The complex trap, the hidden markings, the dramatic rescue, it captivated people's imaginations. But what truly touched hearts was Hope's resilience. Videos of her playing in her hospital bed, purring despite her bandages, went viral. She became a symbol of survival, of the triumph of innocence over cruelty. Donations poured in to help other rescued animals. The investigation revealed the full scope of Marcus Green's activities. Over 2 years, he had set up similar traps in cities along the West Coast, each one more sophisticated than the last. His capture led to the discovery of detailed notebooks filled with drawings and calculations. The traps weren't just acts of cruelty, they were experiments, testing the limits of both his victims and potential rescuers. Hope had ended his twisted research. Recovery wasn't always easy. Some nights, Hope would wake with nightmares, her tiny body trembling at remembered pain. But Sarah was there, having temporarily fostered her during recovery. She would speak softly to the kitten, reminding her that she was safe, that the darkness couldn't hurt her anymore. Gradually, the nightmares became less frequent, replaced by peaceful sleep and contented purrs. The case brought attention to a dark underworld of animal cruelty that few had known existed. Legislative hearings were held, prompted by Hope's story. Laws were strengthened, penalties increased. The detective who had helped save Hope testified about the sophistication of the traps, the deliberate nature of the cruelty. Photos of Hope's recovery were entered into evidence, her story moving even the most hardened legislators to action. Hope's original family drove down from Seattle as soon as she was strong enough for visitors. The reunion was emotional. Tears flowed freely as Hope recognized their scent, their voices. She had grown during her ordeal, but some things remained unchanged. The way she nuzzled into her young owner's neck, the particular chirp she made when happy. Through all her suffering, she had held on to who she was. The veterinary staff organized a special celebration for Hope's last day of treatment. The little gray kitten had become their mascot, a reminder of why they had chosen their profession. She approached each person in turn, offering headbutts and purrs, as if thanking them for their care. Even the most stoic staff members found themselves wiping away tears as they said goodbye to their miracle patient. Sarah's animal shelter implemented new training programs, teaching staff to recognize signs of deliberate cruelty and trap manipulation. Hope's case had shown them that animal abuse was evolving, becoming more sophisticated. They needed to evolve too, to protect other innocent lives. The trap's complexity had nearly spelled disaster, but understanding it had ultimately led to justice. Experts studied Marcus Green's notebooks, trying to understand what had driven him to such elaborate cruelty. They found a mind obsessed with control, with pushing boundaries. But Hope had proven that even the most carefully designed systems could be defeated by determination, compassion, and the unwillingness to give up on a life in need. Her survival had shattered his illusion of control. The day Hope returned home to Seattle was bittersweet for Sarah. The tiny kitten, who had changed so many lives, curled up in her travel carrier, those bright green eyes watching the familiar landscape pass by. She had grown stronger, her fur now glossy and full. No trace remaining of her ordeal, except for a slight scar above her left eye, a reminder of her incredible journey. Media requests poured in, all wanting to tell Hope's story. But her family was protective, wanting to give her time to readjust to normal life. They shared occasional updates, Hope playing with her toys, sleeping in sunbeams, doing all the ordinary things that had once seemed impossible. These glimpses of her happiness became a source of joy for the thousands who had followed her story. Hope's case led to the creation of a specialized task force focusing on sophisticated animal abuse cases. Law enforcement agencies began sharing information, recognizing patterns that might have gone unnoticed before. The tiny kitten's cry for help had exposed not just one criminal, but an entire category of crimes that had been operating in the shadows. Other victims were discovered as Marcus Green's case progressed through the courts. Not all stories had happy endings, but Hope's survival offered solace to those who had lost pets. Her story proved that even in the darkest situations, there was always a possibility of light, of rescue, of justice. She became a symbol of hope for other missing pets and their families. The shelter where Sarah worked saw an increase in adoptions after Hope's story went public. People were moved by her resilience, wanting to give other animals the same chance at happiness. The tragedy had transformed into something positive, creating a wave of compassion that saved countless other lives. Hope's legacy would live on in each animal given a second chance. Sarah kept in touch with Hope's family, receiving regular updates and photos. The kitten, who had survived the impossible, had blossomed into a confident cat, showing no fear despite her traumatic past. She had become especially protective of other animals in the house, as if her experience had given her a special understanding of suffering and the importance of compassion. Marcus Green's trial finally began, with Hope's case as the centerpiece. The prosecution presented the evidence methodically, the sophisticated trap design, the hidden markings, the signature elements that proved premeditation. But what moved the jury most was the before and after photos of Hope. They told a story of survival, of the triumph of innocence over calculated evil. The story's impact continued to ripple outward. Veterinary schools added courses on recognizing and documenting sophisticated abuse. Animal welfare organizations developed new protocols for complex rescues. Hope's experience had exposed a gap in their knowledge, and they were determined to fill it. Her suffering would help protect future victims. 5 years have passed since that fateful morning when a faint cry led Sarah to a hidden horror in a Portland warehouse wall. Hope, the tiny gray kitten who survived the impossible, has grown into a beautiful, confident cat. Her story, which began in darkness and cruelty, has become a beacon of light for animal welfare across the country. That single cry for help set in motion changes that would save countless other lives. Today, Hope lives happily with her family in Seattle, showing no signs of the trauma she endured. The only physical reminder is the small scar above her left eye, barely visible now beneath her soft gray fur. But her legacy lives on in the strengthened laws, improved rescue protocols, and enhanced training programs that her case inspired. Her suffering led to protections that ensure other animals won't face the same horrors. Sarah still works at the Portland Animal Shelter, though her role has expanded. She now trains other rescuers to recognize signs of sophisticated abuse, sharing the lessons learned from Hope's case. The trap that nearly took Hope's life became a teaching tool, its complexity helping others understand the evolving nature of animal cruelty. Every time Sarah shares Hope's story with new trainees, she sees the same determination in their eyes, never to let such suffering go unnoticed again. Marcus Green's conviction brought closure to many families whose pets had vanished mysteriously along the West Coast. The investigation sparked by Hope's rescue uncovered a pattern of cruelty that might have continued undetected if not for one tiny kitten's will to survive. His notebooks, studied by law enforcement and animal welfare experts, helped develop new strategies for protecting vulnerable animals from sophisticated abuse. The real power of Hope's story lies not in the horror she endured, but in the changes she inspired. Her rescue showed that even in our darkest moments, help can come if we just keep crying out, keep fighting, keep believing. The complex trap designed to break her spirit instead revealed the strength of her character and the compassion that exists in those willing to take the time to understand and help. Each year, on the anniversary of Hope's rescue, Sarah receives a photo from her family. The latest shows Hope curled up in a sunbeam, surrounded by toys, the picture of contentment. But what moves Sarah most is the small detail they always mention, how Hope still runs to help whenever she hears another animal in distress, as if paying forward the rescue that saved her life. Animal welfare organizations now refer to the Hope effect, the way one animal's story can catalyze positive change. The publicity surrounding her case led to increased adoption rates, stronger abuse penalties, and better cooperation between law enforcement agencies. A single cry for help, nearly lost in the morning air, ultimately created a symphony of compassion and change. The warehouse where Hope was found has since been demolished, replaced by a community center that includes a state-of-the-art animal welfare facility. It's a fitting transformation, a place of cruelty becoming a haven of hope. The center's logo features a small gray cat with bright green eyes, a reminder that even the darkest spaces can be transformed by courage and compassion. For those who were there that morning, who heard that desperate cry and worked together to save one tiny life, Hope's story represents something profound about humanity itself. In choosing to stop, to listen, to care, to solve rather than simply react, they demonstrated the best of what people can be. Hope's rescue proved that when we take the time to understand complexity rather than fear it, we can overcome any challenge. And so, Hope's story continues to inspire, reminding us that within every cry for help lies the potential for transformation. Her journey from trapped victim to beloved family member, from subject of cruelty to catalyst for change, shows us that no situation is truly hopeless. As long as we keep our hearts open to those small voices crying out in the darkness, there will always be hope for a better tomorrow.